Okay, you guys have been oh so patiently waiting for real uncut gameplay, so here it is. In the flesh, the big ogre belly flab flesh. In this video, we're showing off a minor settlement battle at the Sky Monolith as the Ogre Kingdoms, led by the Prophet of the Great Maw, Skrag the Slaughterer, defends against a Blood God invasion, complete with Bloodthirsters, Skull Crushers, and a Soul Grinder of Khorne. Before we get into the battle, though, I imagine you all want to see some unit stats and get a better understanding of what exactly each of these new units do. So we'll tackle that first. I'm not going to show everything here, just because I think we'd easily stretch past the 10-minute mark on those alone, and I don't want this to drag on too long. You guys came for gameplay, so I'll highlight some of the important stuff, but we can dive into the minutia of every single unit stat and analysis in another video. And if you want to skip straight to the fight, I'll leave a timestamp in the pinned comment below. Just like in Warhammer 2, Game 3 factions have unique army abilities that are triggered in a variety of different ways, and in the case of the Ogre Kingdoms, there are 3 separate abilities powered by prisoner points, which are generated by killing routing or shattered troops. These unfortunate souls will presumably be eaten and or sacrificed to the Great Maw at a time that is more convenient for the Ogre peoples. At level 1, we have a single target hex called Dismember that lowers speed and acceleration by 60% for 23 seconds, perfect for slowing down an onrushing horde, then blowing them up with iron blasters and lead belchers. At level 2, we have Massacre, an area of effect melee buff that grants 25% AP and 20% base weapon damage in a 35-meter radius for when you're rolling in a death blob and absolutely must crump everything in your path. And finally, we have Butcher, granting a 30% heal and full vigor replenishment to a single target over the course of 18 seconds. You'll want to save that for your high-value monstrous cavalry and single entity monsters, like your Stonehorn, and you'll need 75 routing kills before that Butcher heal can be used, so 25 kills for each ability level. Khorne's Blood for the Blood God meter works much the same way, except that it's powered by total entities killed, unlocking a new ability every 100 total kills. Horn of Khorne is a flat melee attack buff with a 35-meter range. Relentless Rage makes a single target unbreakable and prevents entities from dying for 20 seconds, similar to Refuse to Die from the cohort of Sotek. And Blade of Khorne unleashes a gigantic armor-piercing explosion. In terms of the unit rosters themselves, remember this is not the entire selection, it's just some of the ones that happen to be recorded, so keep that in mind. Nobbler Trappers are a hybrid stalking vanguard unit that will passively snare nearby enemies when they're not moving, severely reducing the opposition speed and hitting them with slight damage over time. Combine that with their throwing weapons, and they are quite the versatile unit, if not particularly reliable. They're crappier goblins, essentially. Gorgers are unbreakable vanguard monsters with slightly slower than heavy cav speeds, specializing in hit-and-run attacks on armored infantry, and they can be improved by Skrag the Slaughterer and his Cauldron of the Great Maw, which we'll cover in a second here. Sabertusk Pack are fast-moving war beasts that hit very hard, similar to War Lions for the High Elves, while Mournfang Cavalry will come in 3 variants, but these are the Iron Fists, granting a missile block chance and higher armor than their naked boobas have any right to. Next to them is our very first look at Rhinox Cavalry, very exciting, and these are called Crushers, wielding great weapon scimitars and clubs, 80 charge bonus, 130 weapon strength majority AP, bonus first large, and they are monster hunters and damage dealers through and through. Scary unit for sure. Nobbler Scrap Launcher is a highly mobile single entity stone thrower with terrible melee stats, but huge weapon strength and almost 50 charge, and it deals collision attacks like a mammoth, which means it will devastate infantry as long as it doesn't get bogged down in melee. And the Stonehorn Harpoon Launcher is the Ogre's most powerful single entity monster with a massive HP pool, high armor, and mammoth-like stats, with an additional armor-piercing harpoon for hurting enemy monsters and cav from range. And it has more armor than a mammoth, so it should be quite a bit tankier. The Fire Belly has magic missile breath attacks, ward saves that literally reflect damage back at attackers in melee, tenderizing weapon buffs, and of course the Lore of Fire, on top of a hefty 40% flame resist. Finally, we have Skrag the Slaughterer, wielding the Lore of the Great Maw, with Brain Gobbler as a leadership debuff, Bull Gorger as a single target melee buff, Bone Crusher as a mailed Iron Gauntlet, smashing units in a small AoE from above, Toothcracker for making units more resilient against missile fire, the Maw as a huge wave clear explosion, 20 winds of magic for that one, and Troll Guts as a single target heal. As Skrag racks up kills, his Gorges will become even more powerful, being granted weapon damage, AP, and regeneration map-wide. Onto the Coordinate side, Minotaur Grit weapons become stronger the longer they're in melee from their Blood Greed, gaining up to 16 melee attack, 20% AP weapon damage, and 15% charge bonus. Fleshhounds of Khorne have a very similar stat profile to Sabertusk, but are much more resilient, with 40 more armor, 20% physical resistance, and 50% spell resist on top of that. Gorby's Chariots of Khorne are exactly what you'd expect. One of the best stat profiles of any chariot unit in the game. Tons of crushing mass. They are just absolute freaking tanks. Blood Crushers are anti-infantry specialist monstrous cavalry, becoming even more deadly with their Hellblade passive, which kicks in past 80 kills. And Skull Crushers are their Warriors of Chaos equivalent, with a better overall stat line and Frenzy, but lacking the anti-infantry specialization. Skull Cannons are chariot artillery hybrids, basically a Hell Cannon if it could also run over infantry and melee, which in the tabletop they could. That never happened in Warhammer, but it's happening for them here, and they will passively regen and replenish ammo while feasting on their enemy's flesh. The Blood Shrine is a War Altar chariot with heavy cav speed, passively regenning while in melee, buffing nearby allies' melee attack and leadership, and the Soul Grinder of Khorne hits like a Mack truck at 500 weapon strength, 800 missile damage, both majority AP, and like most Coordinate units, sporting 25% resistance to spell damage. Bloodthirsters are of course some of the scariest melee combatants in the game, able to augment their own speed, massively increase their already ridiculous weapon damage, fire magic missile breath attacks, and explode enemies around them in a burning rage, while generally just utterly decimating anything that happens to get too close. So, wanted you guys to have a general understanding of what each of the units do on the battlefield before plunging into the action. My apologies if that took a little bit longer than anticipated, but let's move over to the minor settlement battle now and see how all of this plays out. I do need to make it clear, I am not the one playing any of these battles over the coming days. These were all recorded by Josh from Creative Assembly. He's the liaison between YouTubers and the devs, and the head of our content creator Discord. So, pardon any inexperience and janky camera movement on his part. He is not a professional player, but he put in a lot of time to bring us his footage, so massive thank you to him and all the hard work he's done over the last several months. Of course, I would love to be the one playing the game myself. That will come in time, but apparently we are not there yet. Remember, this build is a work in progress, so keep the feedback coming, but do keep that in mind. Okay, so the table has been set. As Majin Vegeta would say, let us begin. This is a minor settlement battle. Holy crap. Thing is expansive. There are a lot of avenues of attack, many ways for an enemy to approach, many ways for you to defend, and certainly a lot of opportunity for a layered defense where you can maybe put 1 or 2 units in a choke point, hold them back, and then basically layer it like an onion, just like the ogres like to do. Get in touch with their emotions and their need to feed, play the long game, a war of attrition, and slowly move your army towards that final capture plaza as you lay feints and traps in a fighting retreat. Contrary to what you might think, ogres actually have the mobility and the firepower to make that kind of tactic work. These choke points look brutal for an attacker though, and certainly much more dynamic looking battlefield than the ones we're used to seeing in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. If you take a look at the unit cards from left to right, this ogre army is led by Scrag the Slaughterer and a Fire Belly, with a Stonehorn, Harpoon Launcher, Crusher Rhinox Cav, a Slave Giant, Man-Eater Grit Weapons, Man-Eater Pistols, which are tier 5 units right now. Not sure I agree with that placement. If their performance in Game 2 is anything to go by, I'd say they're more of a tier 4 unit at best, maybe even tier 3. Not terrible, but really nothing special either. 2 Iron Fist Mornfang Cavalry, 2 Gorgers, 2 Lead Belchers, which fire handheld cannons for devastating long-range damage, 2 Ogre Bulls, 2 Nobblar Trappers, and 2 regular Nobblars. So, quite the eclectic mix. These are custom battles, I believe, not from the campaign, and we'll see what Josh can do as the armies of the Blood God march on his minor settlement. Interesting thing to note here, with the way Khorne's Blood for the Blood God army ability currently works, ogres can kind of troll the Hunter of Souls because he needs a flat 100 kills to unlock each new level. If Josh didn't bring Nobblars here, Khorne would have an extremely difficult time getting good kill counts against the ogres, so perhaps that will get reworked at some point to be more of a percentage-based thing, which may have actually been exactly what happened with the Dark Elves and Murderous Prowess during pre-release. It Can't really remember off the top of my head. But if it's flat 100 kills always, it might be hard for Khorne to get those against ogres and monstrous infantry. Bloodthirsters went straight in. Just straight up aggro, going balls deep here. That's actually insane. They went into the teeth of the enemy army, which is very cornate, but literally this is where the ogres are strongest right here. It's where Scrag the Slaughterer and his Stonehorn is. You pop Bullgorger. Oh, please don't do it. No, 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 please don't. No, God, no. No! No, Josh, no! No, God. That Burning Head is probably not going to do a whole lot against monstrous infantry, and yeah, hitting Minotaurs is basically all that hit. Maybe a couple, yeah, it went through the infantry, but they're all armored, and honestly, you just want to wait for them to get blobbed up in these choke points and maybe hit them with a Flamestorm. I like the use of the Bullgorger, though. Gave melee attack and weapon damage to the Stonehorn, so you could better deal with the Bloodthirster in melee. So we'll see how things develop over on that side right here. A lot of Khornate infantry siding their way through the Noblars, which will not last long against the Blood God's favored sons. And even has a Sabertusk ambush waiting on the wings for that Skull Cannon in the back of the map. Maneater Pistols pulling back towards the central capture point, maybe to build some towers once the scrap builds up. And we got some monstrous cavalry engaging the Skull Crushers of Khorne. It's going to be an interesting fight. I think that model per model, the Mournfang and the Rhinox both should have no problems beating Skull Crushers. They'll take a lot of damage, of course, but it's 12 models versus 32. They have way more weapon strength per model, and overall, I think they'll just do better and be more synergistic with healing, which Ogre Kingdoms have quite a lot of. Fire Breath, maybe gonna get cast here. Explosions going off around that Exalted Bloodthirster, who is already down to 1/3 HP because he YOLO suicided into the middle of all of their best single entity monsters. So, not the smartest AI. Nothing too shocking there, I don't think. Perhaps somewhat thematic for Khorne, though. Yeah, he's going to get that Sabertusk ambush off perfectly. Big charge in from the rear, and with their 70 weapon strength, they should be able to nom their way through the low melee defense of that artillery pretty quickly. Over in the most important fight on the map, Exalted Bloodthirster down to about 1/5 health now. And the Maw about to get cast by our homie Josh in the middle of a bunch of dual-weapon Khornate warriors. And exploding a ton of them, but perhaps looking more like a spectacle than anything super noteworthy. That's a 20 Winds of Magic spell that maybe did 1/3 the HP of a mid-tier Chaos Warrior unit. So, I wouldn't say that was particularly worth it, but cool to see it nonetheless. Perhaps if you overcast that, you get more armor-piercing damage, but the damage was a little bit underwhelming on that cast for sure, and they were pretty blobbed up, so I wouldn't say that was a terrible usage of the spell. There are some single entities that are sneaking past and maybe thinking about moving towards the middle of the map here. But yeah, that Exalted Bloodthirster beating up on the Slave Giant, towers firing in from above. Josh did build some fortifications near the outer edges of this minor settlement. Sabertusk did not manage to deal with that artillery at all. They got absolutely pooped on by, I imagine, the melee troops that were in there, but I mean, Skull Cannons can defend themselves, so can Blood Shrines and the rest of that Khornate War Shrine element. So, impressive stuff from them, I would say. I mean, because Sabertusks are no joke. They don't have amazing leadership, and they're not incredibly resilient or tanky, but 70 weapon strength on them and 95 speed makes them pretty potent. He's cleared up everything on this side of the map, and now he can kind of turn his attention to the other edges where things are starting to break down a little bit, and he's taken tons of casualties. This is not a particularly tanky Ogre Kingdoms army. No Iron Guts, not a lot of armor across the board. Most of these are I'd say mid-tier Ogre Kingdoms units besides the Stonehorn, Firebelly, Scrag, and the Slave Giant, which is almost dead. And of course, he is fighting a lot of high-tier Khornate stuff. There's Blood Crushers, there's Skull Crushers, there's a Soul Grinder right in there, and oh no, the Firebelly's routing. Scrag's beaten up, he's retreating. Dropping a Bone Crusher to try to get a little bit more space. That's 50% AP magic damage going in. And even the Stonehorn, the tier 5 monster, routed against that Exalted Bloodthirster. So even though the Greater Demons of Khorne were very YOLO in the initial stages, their power's been shown here. They were able to chunk through 8,500 HP of a tier 5 monster. get Scrag down past half and almost kill off the Firebelly too. So Monstrous Cavalry needing to retreat, using the bridge to make it over, and Scrag might get sniped out here by a Greater Demon of the Blood God. Monstrous Cav is probably going to make it there in time. Soul Grinder, also a huge issue. I think that Firebelly is just toast at this point. 500 weapon strength, majority AP on that Soul Grinder. Brutal. Casting Eruption to try to create some space. Might be able to do some work against the infantry, but not against single entity monsters. And, oh no. Could Josh lose this game? It's a possibility. I think he should be able to stabilize here, but it's been kind of a torrid affair so far. Taking lots of losses. Big breath attack coming in from the Exalted Bloodthirster, but that's going to miss. Or at least only hit a few Nobblars. Lead Belchers are waiting at the end of that bridge. It's a nice location for them, but there's a single entity coming up from behind. That might be the Blood Reaper on his little chariot. Rhinox Cav should be able to deal with him no problem at all. And you'll notice that he still has not unlocked Dismember through his army abilities because he hasn't been able to chase off any routing troops. Maybe if they're crumbling. I imagine if they're crumbling, which demons do, just as the Bloodthirster disappears. I think he just crumbled out. I think they generate the routing or shattered kills that way if they're crumbling out at the same time. But we just got to look at the grape shot from the Soul Grinder of Khorne, basically firing a cannon like a Necrofax Colossus. Interesting. But yeah, both the Ogres and Khorne can kind of troll each other on the army abilities, and neither has been able to generate much in the way of their special powers. Unleash the power! Oh, those cute little Nobblars. You must run. There's a Soul Grinder coming. And the Stonehorn's seen better days. Only 1200 HP left on him. Scrag and the Monstrous Cav should think about sallying out here and just getting a full surround off on that Soul Grinder. Balance of power is beginning to shift in the Ogre Kingdom's favor, but not by a whole lot. They're holding on for now, and they've still got some important units left. Morn Fangs, Rhinox Cav. Yeah, I mean, the Crushers are 11 entities left. They're almost full HP. That's a huge deal. If they get a full surround off on anybody, on anything left on this field, they will win. He's folding all his wings back now, retreating back towards that central capture point. But Monstrous Cavalry is his trump card, and they can put in some serious work here in the late game to carry him to victory. Skull Cannon opening up, and Lead Belchers will return fire. Not fantastic accuracy on their part. I believe they just missed every single one of their shots. Trying to find something to heal. And it's just going to end up being Scrag. Gorgers should have regen now, but I'm not sure Scrag got a bunch of kills. There were just so many single entities over on that side of the battlefield. Most of the infantry engaged elsewhere, so Scrag didn't get tons of body parts put in the cauldron. And the Gorgers have paid the price for that because one of them is already down to one model remaining. Other one's okay. Actually, pretty healthy, all things considered. 7 models left, about 4/5 HP. Oh god, the Stonehorn. The Stonehorn just freaking died. It's over for that tier 5 monster. But Sabertusk got a full surround off on the Blood Reaper, and now Monstrous Cavalry can strike it from both sides. And once that hero goes down, I think this might be GG, but at what cost? You've lost your Stonehorn. You've lost your Sabertusk. You've lost your Gorgers. It's been very painful. But I guess that's what you should expect when you're up against multiple Bloodthirsters and all these tier 5 and tier 4 monsters and Monstrous Cavalry. Yeah. Ogre Kingdoms are going to win this one, but it hurt. And that will be a crumbling Soul Grinder. Army losses kicks in. And the demonic army will destabilize and head back to the warp where Khorne will give them a bit of a spanking in the ether. Feels weird, man. I will say I'm in love with the layout itself. I mean, these kind of battles and battlefields are just so much more dynamic than the open field plain scenarios we've seen just over and over again in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. Anything gets boring after you've played it enough times, but this on top of hopefully some more varied land battles will add a lot of replayability to the campaign, and the layout itself is interesting. There's a lot going on here, a lot of ways to approach it. pretty cool to watch.